When my wife and I were married in 1963, we worked at a camp in northern New Jersey. And one day we went off on a little side trip, just drove down the road and saw this sign and a trail going in the woods. And we stopped to look at it, and the sign said, Appalachian Trail, Maine to Georgia. And I thought, down the trail? Wow. Man, that sounds like a great thing to do. Maine to Georgia. And I had thought of that ever since, that would be a great thing to do. I like to hike a little bits of it here and there whenever I could. Some in New Hampshire when we lived in New Hampshire, and some in Virginia when I was teaching at Alice Lloyd, and then a little bit in North Carolina with Andy for like a 4 or 5 day trip. When this opportunity, and you were the one that suggested it, came up to hike the whole Appalachian Trail, I thought, didn't have to think. Yes. Let's go.
And we did.
And we did.
1,200 miles, about.
And then later, for another year later for me, the rest of it.
So my name's Jesse Anderson, and this is my grandfather, Sam Gilmore, who took me on the Appalachian Trail when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, hiking from Pennsylvania-Maryland line, Penmar, the way up to Mount Katahdin, Maine, about 1,200 miles, for about 3.5 months worth of hiking and outdoors and adventure. So we're both in front of the camera. Okay. Which is an odd place for both of us to be.
Yes, it is.
I'm usually behind the camera, and you're usually avoiding them.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to try to have a conversation that comes off natural and not staged or posed or anything like that, right?
Conversation about the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, about the Appalachian Trail. Because, I mean, you've told the story to a lot of people, I'm sure. Like, a lot of people are curious about the Appalachian Trail and what you did with your however old grandson. So how would you start off telling someone what is the Appalachian Trail?
I would describe the Appalachian Trail, yeah. It's a footpath that goes from Georgia to Maine. It's about 2,200 miles long. Usually takes 5 to 6 months to hike it. We hiked for 3.5. We only covered a little more than half of it.
A little more than half of it.
We didn't go very fast. We averaged just over 13 miles a day.
But that's pretty good, isn't it? About 6 months to complete it at 12 miles a day.
6 months to complete it at 15 miles. No,
it's
about 5 months at 15 miles a day.
Okay, so we could have made it.
We could have made it. We wouldn't have finished until sometime in November.
Yeah,
that's what Wrongway did.
Would have been a little bit too late though, in terms of the schedule that we.
Well, it would have been a bit late. It would have been in the snow.
So
it's too late for me to be hiking.
So where'd we start? Where'd we hike to, and why?
We started at the Pennsylvania-Maryland line, which is sometimes called the Mason-Dixon line, and hiked north through Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine.
So why'd we go hiking?
I wondered that for a long time. I had asked you that. Why did we go hiking? Well, I went hiking because I had wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail since 1963, and went hiking this time because I wanted to get out in the woods with you.
Now there is a little bit of a difference between taking your grandson on a weekend hiking trip and taking your grandson 3.5 months from Pennsylvania to Maine. Not much of a difference, to be fair, but a little bit.
Just a bit. Well, I thought you enjoyed hiking when we were on the Appalachian Trail in Mount Rogers area.
Mm-hmm. Tell about that story. I thought that was, from what I've heard, that was kind of the start to the whole let's go hiking on the AT, and also the example of you saying that, like, oh, Jesse might actually be able to go hiking on the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, I figured you'd have trouble hiking, just the part we did. We hiked, it's maybe 4 miles to the first shelter, and we got there before the day was half done. I thought we'd probably stay there for the night, but it was crowded, so we hiked on to to a place where we could set up a tent, and we got there and sat for a few minutes, and you said, "Grandpa, I'm bored. Let's hike." So we hiked a little further, took a not normally traveled trail around the back of Mount Rogers to the old orchard shelter, and got there and put out our sleeping bags and were fiddling around, and you said, "Grandpa, I'm still bored. Let's hike some more." So we packed everything up and hiked to the car and finished the trip that I thought would be 4 days. We finished it in a day and a half.
Didn't you say at one point that it was my suggestion?
It was your suggestion to hike the whole Appalachian Trail. We were talking to you on the phone one time, and I was talking to you, and you just said, "Hey, Grandpa, let's hike the Appalachian Trail next summer." And I stopped and thought a little bit and said, "The whole thing?" "Yeah." "Okay, you're on." So from that point on, I started planning, and I guess you hadn't planned on really hiking the whole thing, or didn't have any idea what it meant to hike the whole thing.
Well, I was 12, so I had no conception of what 27 or 1,200 miles really was. I didn't know the distance between Georgia and Maine, or Pennsylvania or Maine, or my backyard and down the street for that matter. So agreeing to hike the entire trail was more or less agreeing to go on a hiking trip with you, but not really realizing what I was signing up for. Because I remember we have the image of us starting out that Grandma took when she dropped us off at Penn Mar. And I remember knowing that we were off on a great adventure, and knowing that we were heading out somewhere, but having there was no way that I had any realization how far we were going, or the things that we would see along the way, or anything like that. There was no way for me to conceive of it, because it's nothing that I'd ever done or experienced before.
You weren't really familiar with the map of eastern United States, so from Pennsylvania to Maine meant nothing.
It didn't mean anything, and I didn't have as much experiences as you or even your children did hiking and things like that. I had done it from time to time with you, but never for probably never for even overly extended periods of time. I don't know if I've been on a week hiking trip.
No, that trip on Mount Rogers was the longest one. We were out just 2 nights then.
Yeah, so the longest trip I'd been on was 2 nights long, and then you decide I could make it 3.5 months.
Why not? Do you remember the first couple days we hiked on the Appalachian Trail when we started at Penn Mar?
I remember being exhausted.
Do you remember the hiking sticks, though?
I know I didn't have them for long.
Why?
I mean, you mean the nice applewood hiking sticks that my grandfather was so kind to have handcrafted and dried just for us to take on the Appalachian Trail?
And why didn't you have them?
I'm not sure.
Because every tree we went by, you tried to hit it, and pretty soon you had broken the ends off the sticks.
Oh, but they made fantastic swords, and those trees never were never
I had to laugh, though, because when I used to hike with Matt, his favorite thing was that he'd always take his hiking stick and pretend it was a spear and throw it at everything. You pretended it was a sword and were hitting everything.
So what went into the planning and the setup? And because, from the thought and the idea to actually, being at the very start of the trail takes a lot of work, and I wasn't part of that at all.
Well, we had to do some shopping and get you pack and sleeping pad and sleeping bag, and of course I had cooking equipment and all the other stuff we needed, but mostly just and hiking clothes, which you didn't particularly like. You didn't like shorts too much at that time.
So what else went into the planning? Were you and Grandma? Food, of course, but were you and Grandma? Was she concerned about you hiking, and you concerned about me hiking? And you are taking a younger kid out on a...
I had no problem thinking that you'd be able to make it. My major concern was, what do we do about school?
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew you couldn't be out there without some official plan that it'd be school.
So what was our plan?
It pretty much didn't get very solidified. So that I guess that bothered me, and that was one reason why we didn't hike beyond middle September.
Well, you're a professor, so school.
Oh, yeah, we could have done school, but I didn't have the experience of trying to get a 13-year-old boy to study algebra.
Yeah, but I did. I carried an algebra book for a large majority of the trail until we decided we could cut some weight down.
Because you weren't using it anyway.
Because I didn't use it at all, but that was homeschooling for me.
And I don't think the state officials would have accepted carrying an algebra book as an official homeschooling plan.
Yeah, but I feel like, and I'll probably argue this for, like, it comes into my argument for any sort of public school or anything like that, any of those debates, is I would argue that I learned more and grew more out there on the trail, having the opportunity, to do that.
I don't question that at all, but I think state officials,
that
isn't what state officials will accept.
It's not what they're worried about.
Lists of specific things that have to be studied and learned. It doesn't matter whether it has any applicability to life or not. It's the rule. Okay, so let me ask the question.
Are you going to ask a question?
Why did you want to hike the Appalachian Trail?
I have no idea.
Why did you suggest it?
I didn't suggest it.
Yes, you did.
I'll still argue and still stand that I don't remember suggesting it. I don't know what I was signing up for. If I look back and I answer why am I glad I hiked the Appalachian Trail, or like why would I want to bring like a kid of my own on the Appalachian Trail, is because like I said, like I grew so much out there. It really did help me process and kind of transition from losing my mom and going through like moving and everything like that. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on, and having the opportunity to get away and form a relationship with you, and go on an adventure, a journey that is something that most kids don't get to do, was just amazing, and something that leaves me continuously nostalgic for the Appalachian Trail. Like you have that, like I've heard you talk about the urge that you have to get back on the trail sometimes, and like wanting to go hike and preparing for trips and things, which is getting harder and harder. And I'm, you took me out when I was 12, so now for the rest of my life, I'm going to have that same nostalgic pull to get back on the Appalachian Trail and to, spend time outdoors and be able to, for a month or so, just focus on the pace of your footsteps and going to bed at night and waking up in the morning.
You never did just focus on the pace of your footsteps. You had to have somebody to talk to. I
love talking, and I guess I never focused on the pace of my footsteps. I focused on whatever rhythm or beat I'd come up in my mind, because I would spend hours doing what crazy people do, I guess, and just finding a rhythm, beat, or phrase and circling that. That's how I hike. I find one thing and I circle it continuously with every footstep.
I count my footsteps, so I have a rough idea of how far we've gone.
Oh, wow. That sounds terrible. What's the farthest you've counted?
I don't know. Probably 10,000.
Wow.
Which is about 10 miles.
Which is you have to find something to occupy your mind when you're hiking, though. I think it's why a lot of people like getting out on the trail, is because it's a place to think and a place to recycle ideas. And
I can't remember any of them, but I remember composing poems in my mind while I was hiking.
I'd do the exact same thing. Yeah. You'd start with a line or a phrase and then start building onto it.
Trying to build something, yeah.
And you remember during rainy days or floods, I'd start singing, raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling. Remember those? Do you?
I can't remember that song particularly.
Well, I used to
what
find...
I can remember is talking to everybody else on the trail. And I can remember me telling you, Jesse, I can't talk. I gotta breathe.
Going up hills and pretty much any sort of terrain, I would be talking to you, and you'd be saying, "I really can't answer," but not directly. Like I'd be saying, "Hey, Grandpa, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that rock? Or what do you think about the shelter we're coming to?" And that would always be the answer. I don't think. Which is your way of saying, "I don't want to talk right now. I can't talk right now."
And I couldn't, because I was so out of breath a lot of the time, especially going up hills like you say.
So I'm curious, what were some of your concerns? What were you excited about? And what was that first...
While we were hiking, or when we were thinking of hiking?
Both when we were thinking of hiking, in that first few weeks when we first got on the trail. What did we run into that you might not have been expecting in terms of hiking on the trail?
I guess one of my concerns was, like I said, schooling, but also food. Couldn't we keep enough food in us to give us the energy to keep hiking? And there were times when we didn't, especially when you got so tired of tuna fish and noodles that you didn't want to eat any more of it. And then when we got to town, especially, do you remember the first place we stayed, the first town we got to stay?
I remember a terrible hotel. I don't know.
That's it. That's
I don't know if that was
Duncannon,
the
Pennsylvania. That was the. I can't remember the name of the hotel there. It was an old hotel.
Right in the center of town.
Right in the center of
with
town.
With a bar at the bottom floor and full of smoke.
On the first floor, yeah. And the place they gave us to stay had only one single bed in it.
I slept on the floor next to dust balls and cobwebs that had been there for...
And you remember what the floor was like?
Splintery wood.
It was so splintered up, and the windows, it was hot. It was one of those 95 plus hot days, and the windows in the room couldn't open. It was not air conditioned, and the windows were not openable. They were broken, so they couldn't open.
How nice.
And it was beastly hot in there. Oh, I was so glad to get out of that hotel.
I remember that it was terrible, but I don't remember it being any worse than some of the shelters we stayed in.
Oh,
so.
It was much worse than the shelters.
Was it worse than all of them?
Yeah, it was much. The Doyle Hotel. That was
Doyle. I guess it was just part of the trip for me.
Well, at that point, it was also new.
I remember the storm that I remember was the Pennsylvania rains.
Yeah, that was all in Pennsylvania yet.
Okay.
We had 2 heavy storms in Pennsylvania, 3 maybe. But that one, just after it started raining as we were going up the mountain.
Yeah.
And it rained so hard that walking on top of the mountain, we were walking in water up to your knees. This is on top of a mountain now.
Just the stream gushing
just
down.
The stream right on the flat top of the mountain.
Yeah.
It was raining so hard. And then we got to a shelter. Can't remember the name of the shelter, of course, but I held up my sleeping bag and water ran out the bottom.
I do remember that because you took more precautions after that night in
Yes.
terms of keeping your sleeping bag dry.
When we got into Delaware Water Gap, we quickly had to catch a ride because we couldn't stay overnight. There was a bus leaving then to take us around the flooded bridge.
Because the water had risen so
Until
high
the
that
bridge was closed.
the whole town was flooded almost.
The whole town was flooded, and Interstate 80, I think,
had water up to the beams.
Up to the footbridge was covered with water, so you couldn't cross it.
Yeah.
But they took us across in car, and we hiked on that day and stayed at a Appalachian Mountain Club hut.
And that was during. How long did those It was a hurricane that had come up and pushed storms up into Pennsylvania.
Several days it poured.
And so we were wet and rainy for probably a week.
Probably.
And my memory of it is it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed hiking in that rain. It was pouring all the time. I got to splash in puddles and I just remember having the best time during that storm because it was nice and cool and it was the perfect hiking temperature and I loved the rain. But if I was out on the trail now, I would be absolutely miserable. That is the worst. Like, I like the rain, but we were soaked through to the bone.
And we didn't have any dry sleeping bag.
There was no dry sleeping. There was no dry anything, except a little bit of my clothing. Maybe I think I had slightly dry socks to put on every morning. I can't imagine what my feet looked like at the end of that, and your feet. Just after walking on them, being so damp for so long.
I can remember not enjoying that a whole lot because I was worried the whole time about are we going to find a shelter first of all, and are we able to find any dry spot to dry things out tonight, and then will we be able to cook supper, get a fire going, even though it was a camp stove, be able to get the camp stove going just to cook supper.
Yeah, and
it worked.
And I remember it being just one of the best parts of the trail, hiking during the Pennsylvania rains. I thought it was so much fun.
Remember the bear we saw in just at the end of the Pennsylvania rains?
Is that the big bear that didn't want to move anywhere?
Didn't want to move out of the puddle it was lying in. Yeah. That was the day that we were going into Delaware Water Gap also.
And that was a big big black bear.
It was a big, full-grown male, probably.
Yeah, and we rounded up the corner, and we were able to look kind of down on a slope and a hill, and he was just lying there in the middle of this fairly large path, fairly wide path.
In a mud puddle.
Yep, in a mud puddle.
Rain puddle.
I think he noticed us and kind of got out and was walking really slowly and calmly away. And we backed up and blew some whistles and waited for probably an hour and didn't
wait
see
quite
him.
that long. But when we tried to go again, we could see him looking over his shoulder at us. Just looking over, and
he didn't care about us at all.
I could imagine him saying, "You guys just wait. This is my trail."
That's exactly how it was.
Yeah, but then we didn't have any trouble with him after he got off the trail.
Yeah. Well, we didn't see him again after he was.
Didn't see him again after that. No. One thing I was wondering is, what part of the whole hike did you like best, other than the tuna fish and pesticides?
Well, and you need to touch on the tuna fish. What did we eat while we were on the Appalachian Trail? That's an important note.
If we were on the trail hiking, we ate tuna fish and pesticides. If we were in town, we ate whatever we could find: pizza, hamburgers.
I'm surprised some of the
dogs.
towns had food left once some of the hikers came through, right?
Oh, they were prepared. They always knew what was going to happen. And it was Duncannon again, where we stayed at that awful hotel. But that's where we ordered
the giant pizza.
Giant pizza with as much on it as we could get.
I remember that.
Sausage and vegetables and cheese. And
well, and I remember the place in the 100-mile wilderness in Maine, White House Landing,
right,
where we had a pound hamburger before you added the toppings and the bread and everything like that. Right? Wasn't that what it was?
You got a hamburger and it was made with 1 full pound of meat. Only you got a pizza.
Did I get a pizza?
You got a pizza and you ate over half of it that night and still had enough to carry for lunch for the next 2 days.
Oh, well, good. But you got the pound hamburger then.
I got the pound hamburger.
And considered you had fries with it or something.
Yeah.
And you considered buying something more even after you finished that.
We were hungry. Where was it? That was in Maine also, at Harrison's Pond. Pierce Pond. Harrison's shelter at Pierce Pond Lake, where we went in for a breakfast for like $4, $5 each. Mm-hmm. And it was a stack of 12 pancakes and several sausage patties and orange juice and eggs.
And we ate it all.
And then there were the meals at the cabin in Maine, which were always all you can eat.
The big dinner table.
The big dinner table, right? And it really was all you can eat. They have a great big casserole of maybe shepherd's pie or something like that, and you could have as much. And then the several nights we were there, they had fresh corn on the cob.
Yeah, I remember that.
Remember them bringing out dessert?
No.
Ice cream, but it wasn't a normal half gallon of ice cream.
Yeah.
It was one of the ice cream store style big tubs of ice cream.
I'll tell you what I remember about food. I remember food tasting better than I'd ever had food taste, and I've ever had food taste since on the trail, because everything about my body wanted whatever was in the food that I was eating. So I remember coming to one of our relatives' houses and having a glass of whole organic milk.
That was Richardson's, yeah.
And it being the best, most creamiest, beautiful glass of organic milk I'd ever had. So full of flavor and richness. And no milk. I mean, I have searched for milk. It made such an impression on me that, like, when I go to stores to buy gallons of milk, I look for the best quality milk they have, or I buy a type of milk I've never had before. I have never found a glass of milk that was as good as that glass of whole milk on the Appalachian Trail. And then I also, I remember what we actually ate on the trail. You had me try sardines for the first time, which are okay.
But they weren't very good in tuna fish. I mean, in noodles, pasta sides.
They weren't good in pasta sides. They're not good with pita bread that you kind of wrap them up in, and that's the only thing you're eating. But it was lunch, and we had a breakfast shake in the morning sometimes, just like a powdered chocolate mix that you'd mix with half clean water that had been sterilized from a pond that was next door, or if you're lucky, a nice stream or whatever, a spring, which some of it was really nice water, some of it wasn't the best. And you drink that down in the morning. And I remember Lipton pasta sides and tuna fish, and Idaho and potatoes.
Those were pretty good.
Yeah, they were good. They're not any like I tried them probably a year ago, and they're
They just
miserable.
don't do the same thing.
They're disgusting. They are Lipton pasta sides and Idaho and potatoes are so low quality food that tasted so high quality when we were on the trail. Except for towards the end. I remember there was one night in particular where I didn't want seconds of Lipton pasta sides, and I let you eat it. I was just kind of exhausted. So another favorite section of the trail for me was the Whites, or the Presidential Range. Probably what I considered some of the most beautiful portions of the trail. And some people consider some of the worst portions of the trail because you're up above tree line, you're exposed to the weather, exposed to the
one of the more dangerous and harder parts, but it is one of the most beautiful parts.
Yeah. What do you remember from that range in Vermont? Am I correct, or New Hampshire?
The White Mountains are in New Hampshire.
What do you remember from that range in New Hampshire and kind of us hiking there? Because kind of the Presidential Range
was hard. It was, and there's so many steep places in the Whites where you literally are going up at some places a 60-degree angle. You're going up a mountain 45 to 60 degrees, very steep, and there are no switchbacks. You just go up.
I remember one, and I hope we have a picture of it. One of those shelters in the Whites where it had a pond next to it, and you had this shelter, and we hiked down a steep cliff valley down to that shelter, and then the next morning you could just look up, and you know, as you were hiking down to the shelter, you could just see on the other side of the shelter this large rocky ridge line, and you can see the little tiny hikers making their way up it, and we just knew we had that waiting for us in the morning.
I think that was Carter Notch.
Carter Notch.
The last hut we stayed at.
It was a beautiful hut and a really stunning scene, but I just remember because when we were hiking down and still maybe half a mile or a mile out, we could see the other trail, you know, the other side of the trail, and we could see hikers going up that arm of it.
Yeah, there's so many places in the Whites where you're coming down one side steep and steep on the other side, and you can see hikers there. That one gets confused with another, but the Mount Moosilauke is like that. When you come down Moosilauke, that's the one that had the wooden stairs on it where we met Pat.
Drilled into the stone.
Right, and she took us back to can't remember the name, back to the people we were staying with that night.
Yeah. My perception of steep things would be completely different now if I hiked the trail again, which I will sometime and have fun stories to tell about it. But my perception of steep things when I was 12 years old was, oh, this is fun, we're just at an angle. And then going downhill, oh, this is fun, I'm just slanted forward. And then going flat, oh, this is fun, I get to stand up straight. It didn't, I don't remember it really testing the extent of my ability. Once I had my trail legs, I could pretty much scurry anywhere,
and you did,
and I did fairly well. Well, talk a little bit about that last summit, about Mount Katahdin itself. Yeah, the end of our northern trek.
I remember you were a little worried about going up because you kept saying you were afraid of heights, but you didn't have any trouble with it, it seemed to me.
I mumbled the whole way, though.
You might have mumbled the whole way. But
dumb mountain, stupid mountain, terrible mountain, why are we doing this? But I kept walking forward, as I'd been trained to do for the past 1,200 miles. Yeah. Well, and it was...
But there were some rough places on that mountain, too.
It was fairly terrifying.
I mean, you had to do a chin up on that iron bar and crawl along on the ledge looking down.
You had to pull yourself up. You could see where you could have dropped. You know, the ridge that we were hiking up, it felt like we had 5-10 feet of space some areas, and then a drop, a couple of hundred.
It wasn't perfectly straight down, but it was a pretty steep drop.
It was enough you didn't want to fall.
You have to remember, that's the easiest trail to get up Katahdin.
There's the knife edge on the other end that
No,
we
thanks.
didn't go down.
No,
Yeah, we looked at it,
no.
but we never
thanks.
considered it.
Not a bit.
And then you get up to talk about getting up to the
You
top.
get
of
up to
Mount
the top,
Potomac.
and remember how icy it was up there?
Yeah, it was.
This was September 22nd. It had snowed the day before.
It was icy
and
sideways.
They thought of closing the mountain because of the storm, but we were lucky to get up. It was a beautiful sunny day. But on top, even in full sunlight, it was still so cold that that rime ice was still sticking out from the rocks. The ice that forms when the wind blows,
Just
blows
from the
it out,
moisture in the air.
horizontal rather than vertical icicles. And it was just so cold. But then we got up to the top and you hiked across a place called the Tableland, Thoreau's Spring.
Which is just a flat plateau.
Fairly flat because it's that kind of a mountain where it's not a steep point on top. It's fairly flat. But then we got up there and it was so cold we couldn't stay very long enough to get pictures.
So do you have any final questions or thoughts?
Would you do it again?
Oh well, I plan to.
I don't mean that. I mean if you
With
were
you?
back now to 13 years old, knowing more about the trail, would you do it again?
Yeah,
Would you still do it?
I would do the whole trail, and I do it twice. I do it at 13 and 15. But in all seriousness, absolutely, it was probably the best experience of my teenage years, and I am hoping to hike the entire trail before I'm too old to do it. And I'm hoping to, or if there's ever a chance to take someone who's that age, between 8 and 15, on a trail months long. I think it's just an amazing experience, and I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life for taking me on that trail.
Well, I'll be grateful to you for the rest of mine for giving me an excuse to go.
So are you sure? So I guess the same question to you. Would you take me on the trail again if?
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah.